Hey, welcome to Guy Shrink. I'm Bill Roman, host here, and I'm in Toledo, Ohio, the Glass City at Cogito Studios. My good friend, compatriot, and partner in crime, Jordan Valdivia, my director and producer, is on assignment right now, and our associate director and producer, Keegan, is here, and he's running the cameras and the microphone, and so we're underway. Our guest today is a very dear and close and good friend of mine, Arlyn Norris, who's a pastor, retired, I guess, right now, Arlyn? You're retired?
Yes, that's
Retired
correct.
Lutheran pastor, living in the balmy state of Arizona in Tucson. And Arlyn and I have known each other for 5 decades, Arlyn. Can you believe
Yeah.
that? That's kind of scary. And today we're going to talk about something very, very important. And Arlyn's going to share his experience about the death of his wife, Wanda, and the grieving process, what men can expect and what can men go through. And so, Arlyn, how I begin every conversation is with a question of what keeps you awake at night. And so, Arlyn, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'll try to focus on the topic that you asked about, and I think during that process of my wife becoming ill and being diagnosed as having a terminal illness, and then her death, and then what came after that. It's things like, first of all, how's this all going to go for both of us, especially as I more and more took the role of the caretaker, and sometimes there was some anxiety with that. And then once she died, I had to deal with grief, and that really was a very difficult journey to go through that time of grief. And then eventually, I was met someone new, and I've remarried. Um, and that's turned out to be a good thing in the end. But there were some times of transition when my second wife and I um, started a new marriage together. There was more, I think, than we expected, and there were some times of real turmoil that went with that, I think, and so that's something that at least we didn't expect to have. We knew there would be some transition stuff, but I think it was more difficult. There were more issues than we thought. So those would be the kinds of things that come to my mind in
Okay.
response to your question.
Okay, Arlyn, could you say more about dealing with Wanda's illness initially? I know that she had battled cancer for many, many years. And how did you, as her husband, manage yourself and that situation?
Yeah, it was 25 years at least between the time she had her first cancer diagnosis and her death. Um, but she had some years there where she was diagnosed the first time, and then it was 10 years of remission. And so we didn't have to deal with cancer during that time. But then it showed up again. And so then she went through treatment again for cancer. Um, and uh, and then it was 13 years of remission. Then it showed up a third time, and she did go through treatment again for the cancer. And so during those times, it was more just walking through with her and being of support to her, trying to help not just her, but we had 3 kids during this time, and helping them deal with that, and just all of the things. But it wasn't until the last diagnosis that we finally said, okay, this time they're not talking about, okay, we'll see if we can't get this back into remission again. It was, there were, the cancer went to her liver, had gone to her liver, but by the time that fourth diagnosis came, and so then we had to shift our thinking about There was some possibility for a while of saying, okay, maybe we can find some treatments that would extend her life. But eventually she came to the point where she said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do the treatments because they weren't really helping that much, and it was making her miserable. And so we switched, and that was a challenge. But I think we were able to come to a point where we just said, okay, let's accept that. And I think one of the key things that helped us with that was having her be involved with hospice then, because I think hospice really helped her have the best life she could have the last months of her life. And so that was the first part. I don't know. Have I answered the question?
Yeah, I ask you, what was that like for you in the caring, managing yourself and managing the care for your wife during that period of time?
There were two things that were going on, at least, probably more, but two that come to my mind first was, when we first had that diagnosis and we were saying, okay, we know that she's not going to get over that this time. Before we always had the hope that, okay, we treat the cancer and maybe it won't come back again, but the last time we knew that wasn't happening. And I remember, being, first of all, struck with a great deal of personal grief, and there were tears for me and for Wanda. And there were times where, lots of anticipatory grief. But then, you kind of start getting into a routine, and she was doing some treatments for a while. She had some different types of chemotherapy, and also eventually some whole brain radiation that they did for her. And my role was to take her to the appointments, to be there with her, to be another set of ears when the doctors talked, so that then we would go home and we'd compare notes. What did you hear? What did I hear? Those kinds of things. And then as things went on, I mean, her last diagnosis was in August, and up until about December after that, she was still doing pretty good. There wasn't a lot of, but by the end of December, we could see she was starting to weaken. And so then my role kind of switched to be more, not just to be the supportive one, but I had to start doing more and more things for her, and I decided, for me, I wanted to do that. Not everybody can. For variety, they might not have the emotional ability, they might not have the physical ability, but I could do that. But when it was probably the end of January that she decided that no, I don't want to do any more treatments anymore. And it's at that point that we contacted hospice. And I knew that would be helpful for her. And I think I had some idea that it would be helpful for me too, as the one who was the primary caretaker. But I really discovered how much more they had to offer both of us as we went through that. And so it was that transition of having to take care of her more and more. Pretty soon I was doing all the cleaning in the house. I was doing the cooking. I'd help her get up in the morning. Eventually I was helping her get dressed, and by the end I was doing lots of personal cares for her, even to the point of helping to feed her, because she didn't have the strength to manage, getting a spoon to her mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So it was those kinds of things. But hospice was it was just wonderful. I can't say more about it.
And Arlen, Wanda stayed at home the entire time, didn't she?
Yes, she did. Yes, we were able to do that, and it was because that again we had more and more help as the time went on. you know,
Hmm.
uh, and there just were a lot of ways, and there were other people who came in. She has a pretty good size extended family, brothers and sisters, and they came and visited. My brother and sister-in-law were around, and they helped out as well. And so we had lots of support that way, and that
Right. And your one son lives there in Tucson,
yes,
not too
yeah,
far away from you. So,
yep, yep. And my other two kids did come down. I don't know. I mean, yeah, they would help out a little bit. It was mostly for them to be able to see
hmm
Wanda before her death.
hmm
Yeah.
hmm So, Arlen, how did you manage yourself in all of that? What did you do to take care of Arlen?
Yeah, yeah. I thought that I knew that was important for me. And there are certain things that I've done anyway for as far as self-care is concerned. It was important for me to maintain relationships with other people and have some time for that. It was important for me to get good physical exercise, um, and make sure I did that kind of thing. Um, and another thing that's always been important for me, there are certain spiritual practices that I've followed for a long time. I journal every day, and to kind of start the journaling is just it's okay. What's my high for the day? What's my low for the day, for the previous day, and then to reflect on a biblical passage and to have some time for some centering prayer. All of those kinds of things were important for me, and um, I'm an early morning person, so a lot of times I was able to get up and do some of those kinds of things even before Wanda was ready to get up, and then I would have to go in and
Hmm.
help her start her day.
hmm
But
hmm
so
Arlen,
those were things.
would you say a little bit more about writing? What our listeners don't know is that you're a very fine writer, and you've done a lot of writing over your career, and you find that to be pretty therapeutic. Could you
Yeah,
say some
yeah.
more about that?
One of the things that I decided, first of all, I wanted to write about my experience in my journals, and then it's my practice. Then, well, when I finish a week, I always do a little review of the week, and then when I filled up a whole journal, I like to go back and look at that. And so that was important during the process. And as I got, as I was taking care of Wanda more and more, I decided I would like to write about that experience. And so I began to think about doing a memoir. And eventually, what that's developed in is the kind of the three parts I talked about at the beginning. But yeah, I've been working on a memoir that talks about, first of all, my experience of caring for Wanda. And I thought that maybe would be something a little different because I don't know if a lot of men have written about something like that. I think there have been
Right, right.
other memoirs, especially where women have talked about caring for a spouse, but maybe not so much for men. So I thought that, and then talking about my grief experience once Wanda died, and finally wanting to turn my attention to, okay, yes, you go through grief, but new life is possible. And I didn't know what shape that was going to take, but I had the hope that I would be able to. It's not like you get over grief, I mean, today's All Saints Day, I got to thinking about Wanda today. And yeah, I'm still, there's still moments of sadness with that. But I was able to move past that so that that doesn't happen nearly the way with as much emotional intensity as when she first died. Um, and secondly, eventually I was able to develop a new relationship with my second wife, Pilar, and we are very happy. And it was this thing where she had lost her husband, and in fact, we met at a grief group.
You and I are laughing about that. Yeah.
So,
Would you say a little bit more about that grief group? Because I know in our previous conversation and recently, as
yeah,
well as
yeah.
in the past, you said, "Well, I'm a pastor. I don't need those kinds of things," and how that kind of stopped you from doing it.
When Wanda died, I had been spending a lot of time and energy taking care of her. And then, there were some things that after a death that you do have to attend to kind of tie up the loose ends after a person dies. But in many ways, all the time and energy I'd been spending on caring for her, I wasn't doing that anymore. And I knew that it was important for me to shift my focus more to some self-care for myself. And I talked about the things that I was doing even before Wanda died, and those kinds of things continued for me. But that was one reason why I thought, she died in May, and then the church I belonged to was going to start up a new session for the grief group that they regularly provide for people. At the end of August was really when it was going to start, and I thought, well, here was my initial thought was, well, maybe it would be good for me to do that. I don't know. I've been a pastor and I've helped other people with their grief. Is there a lot of things that I will get out of this? But then I thought, well, maybe I could be of help to some other people who were
I love it. I love it, Arlyn.
When I went to the grief group, I realized, well, yeah, maybe, as we share grief back and forth, we have help to one another. But there was a lot of things that I, learned from that grief group that, I just didn't know about,
Yeah.
And a couple of things that come to my mind with that was, first of all, everybody experiences similar kinds of things as they go through grief in a way, but the other side is everybody's grief is unique, and yeah, there are certain, they used to talk about stages. It's not stages really. It's not like, okay, I get through this one and now I go on to this and I go on to that. No, you're going back and forth. But there are certain, maybe it's aspects of grief, different ways in which you experience grief, and those are similar, and yet it's always a unique experience. Those times where all of a sudden you see something, and that triggers another round of grief. I remember, just coming across things in the house after Wanda died. One day I just happened to see a pair of her glasses that were still lying around, and there was this stab of grief, this stab of pain and of sorrow that comes. Well, the grief group helped me understand. Okay, everybody has those kinds of experiences, but they're all unique. Each one has a different, there are different triggers, and many times it's a little different reaction. But a lot of things in common. The second thing that really surprised me was one of the presenters. We had a series of videos that we listened to or we watched, and one of the presenters talked about how for him, his grief was worse the second year. And I thought, oh, really? It's going to get worse before. I mean, even worse than it was after she died.
Oh, wow.
You know, and I think there were some ways in which that happened. Not always, but you know, there were occasions where, yeah, in some ways it felt worse. You know, so those were some examples of things where those were new insights for me, and it was good for me to be there. It was good for me to be able to, you know, share some of my story with other people who were there, to cry with them, and you know, those were, you know, I cried a lot, but I knew if I didn't cry there, I'd cry someplace else. Right. You know, and if I didn't cry, I knew that would be even worse for me, because I wouldn't be expressing those deep emotions that I felt.
And, real safety in that group to it's a safe place to actually cry and it'd be okay.
Yes, it is because everybody understood. Yeah, we're all in the same boat that way. Yeah.
It's fascinating, Arlyn, that in careers we get this idea. Well, I really don't need that. I'm an expert doing that, and then when we're actually involved in it, we go, "Wow, I didn't know anything about this."
Yeah. I think that's right. So you know, I think it is important to really be intentional. You know, when you are going through grief, to say, okay, I do need to do things to take care of myself. You know, and not to feel bad about, okay, I should be thinking about the rest of my family. I should be sure. I mean, it's not like you forget them completely, but you really need to spend some time, because you're not going to be very good taking care of anybody else if you're not taking
No, not at all. Yeah. In a conversation you and I had a little while ago, a week or so ago, we talked about the importance of good physical exercise as a way to manage some of that. And I know you're a very good swimmer. And could you say a little bit about physical exercise for you?
What, you know, especially after Wanda died. I mean, I was doing that even before she died. I mean, I would try to work it out where I would, you know, if I couldn't swim, if it wasn't the swimming season, I would go out for a walk. And sometimes it was a long walk. I mean, it would be an hour, maybe sometimes even 2 hours, but at least a half hour or that. Or when it was, you know, after she died, my routine was I would drag myself out of bed. I was not excited to get out of bed, but I knew I had to do that. And one of the things that I was very intentional about was the first thing I did after I got out of bed was to make my bed. And the reason I did with that was that was just one little way to erase some of the chaos in my life. Just a little bit. Keep things, you know, and it's just the same way I'm not a great cook, but I can cook for myself, and I've made meals for myself, you know, many times, and all of those kinds of things. So I'd get up in the morning, and the first thing I would make myself do is to go to the pool, and I would swim for a half an hour. Just swim laps. And the way I would pass the time doing that was that there were a series of Taizé choruses. They're little worship choruses. You know, it's just something like Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom, or oh God, we call, from deep inside we yearn for you. And I would sing those in my mind. I would be going through those in my mind and I had about 6 of those, and I would try to do, what I figured was about 5 minutes of each, and that would make 30 minutes. Sometimes I wouldn't, I didn't, I never, well, yeah, I kind of tried to keep a little track of the laps, but there were times where I would check I have an Apple Watch that keeps track of how many laps I do, and it would tell me, oh, you've done 40 minutes or 45 minutes of swimming. And by the time I got out of the water, it wasn't like the low feeling had completely disappeared, but it was better. It was better.
I like that about reducing the chaos.
Yeah.
And doing something. You said it was a discipline that you had to do because you knew if you didn't, you'd be swallowed up in chaotic thought, and you knew that you didn't want to do that.
I didn't, it's not like I said, oh man, I can't wait to make my bed or anything like that. But I just
Yeah, right.
knew that, okay. Then when I went back into the bedroom, that messy bed was not there. It was just, it was, and it was just a little less chaos.
Yeah.
So,
Arlyn, you mentioned Taizé chants. Could you say a word about Taizé so our listeners get an idea what that is?
It's an ecumenical community in France, and kind of a monastic community, but they've attracted all kinds of people who come and visit there, make pilgrimages to that community. And they have some just for me anyway, very wonderful worshipful services. I think prayer around the cross came out of there. But anyway, where, the people gathered together, and there will be a cross in the center, and there will be lights, candles lit around there, very worshipful. And then they will sing. And they're very easy things that you can just sing, you can pick it up. I mean, it's, one of them, as I said, was Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And that you just, there's a very pleasant and very a meaningful melody that goes with that. It's very easy to pick up. And then the whole group who are there, some people know those chants already. Others that have just come can pick them up very easily and sing them along. And then, there'd be scripture readings and prayers and other kinds of things as well. But anyway, it's a community that's really developed, is one of the communities. There's some other sources as well that have developed those very simple worship choruses that can be very meaningful. And one of the things that I talk about in the memoir is that the night that Wanda died, I could tell that the death was coming. She got this very congested breathing and that kind of thing. And I thought, no, this is the end. And I thought for a moment, what can I do? And the first thing I did was I tried to adjust her bed a little bit, and that didn't make any difference. And so I went and, being a pastor, I had my occasional services book, and there are orders in there, prayers and scripture readings that a pastor can use for someone who is in that situation, who's dying. So I got it out and I did that. And I went through all the prayers, all the passages I could think of, and just read those to Wanda. And as I thought about that, I thought about, okay, I need those prayers as much as she did. And yet I was hopeful that she would hear not only my voice, but in some way through those prayers and those scripture readings, that she would hear the voice of God speaking to her. Mm-hmm. And then when I ran out of prayers, then I started singing those chants that I knew. Mm-hmm. and I've spent probably a couple hours doing those things.
Yeah.
And finally went through the stuff, and then I said, okay, now I'm tired. I'm going to lay down for a little bit, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up, I reached over, and there was no sound coming from the bed anymore, except for the ventilator that was helping her breathe. And I reached over, and she had already started to cool. She had died. But I was very. It's still emotional for me to think about that, but
Of course, Arlyn.
it was a very no. I mean, it was a very, it just was. It just seemed like it was a great way for me to share those last moments with her.
Yes. And in those times, what you did is you went to something that was familiar.
Yes.
The scripture for you, the
Yes.
Bible, the Tazay chants. These were things that were familiar to both of you.
Yes.
And how important it is in these kinds of times to look for those things that are the familiar things that have meant so much over the years.
Yeah. So
is that part of the memoir? Are you putting gonna put that in?
I write about that. Actually, I kind of have decided, I kind of start with that experience of just, realizing, okay, we're at the point of death. And then I shift away from that, and then eventually come back to that and tell the rest of the story about, okay, how did I spend those last moments with her? And so I mean, that's a part of that's just a very small, a small part, but it's an important part of just sharing that. And one of the things, to kind of get back to the whole writing the memoir and what it's, I hope that eventually somehow I'll get to the point where I say, okay, I think this is done, and I'd like to get it published. Okay. Even if that never happens, there's been so much growth that has come through being able to look at the experiences that I've had, caring for her, dealing with grief, trying to establish a new life and entering into a new marriage. There's so much I've learned through that.
Yes.
And the memoir really has been a way to reflect on that. And that's been very important for me. I came across something, I don't even remember. I think it might have been an article in Christian Century, but they were talking about how different people respond to traumatic experiences in their life. And there's some people who have traumatic experiences, and I can understand why this happens. And it really affects in a negative way. I mean, people who experience post-traumatic stress syndrome and those kinds of things. I understand where that can happen to people. So, and because of the terrible things that sometimes people have to go through. And then many people go through an experience like that. And it's kind of like, well, they go through it and then they deal with it. And then things just go back to normal for them again. But there are people who are able to go through traumatic experiences, and in the end, it becomes an occasion for growth. And that's what I was hoping for. That's what I was trying to open myself to. And I wanted it to be, if I, do what I could do to open myself, not just to get through the experience, that's important and that's good, but to get to the point where I could experience that as something that would be an opportunity for growth for me. And that's and writing the memoir has really been a way for that to happen, I think.
Well, I think it's been that way for you because of one thing we haven't really even mentioned, but it's certainly been the undercurrent for this whole conversation, and that is the power of love in a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything you've said is just filled with the love that the two of you, you and Wanda, had and still have as a couple, and your love for her and her love for you. And that's one of the things that often just gets unnoticed in all of this.
And that's the, when Wanda died, and I, really experienced the grief. I mean, I had lots of grief before she died, just thinking about what it was going to be like, but it's even more intense once she died. And I was saying to myself, well, this is the price of love. I mean, when you love someone, that's going to be, so if you take the example of a marriage, at least one person is going to have to pay that price.
Yes, right.
But I used to think it was Shakespeare. I think it was really Tennyson, though, that said, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And I would say that. It's very painful to lose the person that you loved. Grief is tough. But I think it's worth the price. Yes. And that's why I was eventually willing to enter into a new marriage. And now I have another love in my life.
Yes.
And we have both, Pilar and I have both talked about that. Well, the day is going to come where one of us is going to have to go through that again. Yeah. And we may have to go through the experience that comes up, that the prelude to death, where one person knows that they're dying and the other person realizes that the spouse is dying, and you got to go through all that stuff. It's still worth it, I think. That's my values. Those are my values.
Interestingly enough, just in the last week, I came across an essay by V.S. Naipaul. It was in the New Yorker a couple of years ago. It's entitled The Strangeness of Grief. And here's a few lines from that. We are never finished with grief. It is part of the fabric of living. It is always waiting to happen. Love makes memories and life precious. The grief that comes to us is proportionate to that love and is inescapable.
That's right. It is
exactly what you've said this entire time, Arlyn.
Yep.
I cannot thank you enough for being willing to talk today about this most important piece in all of our lives, and particularly for guys. We just kind of don't want to do much with it, but it's always there. And so as a kind of a final idea, Arlyn, do you have any like one-liner piece of advice or direction for men that and how to manage whatever you want to call it, manage, come to grips with grief in life, or something that you found that works for you?
I think that it's the basic pattern that comes especially out of the Christian faith of death and resurrection. There is death in the terms of someone dies. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we grieve. We lose someone, and that sort of thing. But I think that we always want to hold on to the hope that there's the possibility of new life. And it doesn't, when Wanda died and I was going through grief, I didn't, say, okay, certainly I'll find someone new. I didn't know whether that was going to happen or not. But I really had the hope that somehow I still would be able to have a new life. And I think that's the pattern that really is it's not just because death isn't just something that happens when someone breathes their last breath. Death is something that we experience throughout our lives. Different kinds of ways in which we die to one thing. We move from one community to another. We lose one job and we go on to another. There's just all of those kinds of things. That there are those little deaths that involve grief. And that's the first thing is we have to acknowledge, yes, this is a death. There's something that has died here, and we need to somehow, we're going to express that grief. Either we do it through being honest with the emotions that we have, or we do it in other kinds of ways, that, we drink too much, or we do other crazy things that are not going to be good for us and can be hurtful to people around us, those kinds of things. So we have to do that, but then we want to hold on to this notion that new life is possible, because I think God is always at work in our lives. God doesn't just send all the things that happen, but God is able to work through the things that happen to bring good out of the difficulties we face, and to have hope that that's what God is going to do for us.
Yeah. So your last word is hope. Have hope.
Yeah,
You know?
it is.
It is. It is. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Arlyn, thank you. Our guest today on Guy Shrink has been Arlyn Norris, a dear friend and retired pastor, and a great writer, and is talking today about something that all of us will deal with in our lifetimes. So, Arlyn, thanks a lot for being with us today.
It's been a privilege to be able to do that, and I hope that people will find it to be helpful.